Welcome to the country that doesn't exist. I am here right now in Tiraspol. Oh my god, that's terrible. Welcome to the country that doesn't exist. I'm here right now in Tiraspol, capital city of the country of Pridnestyrovie. Right here behind me you can see some of the Soviet memorabilia monument to the Soviet army from the Great Patriotic War. World War II as we know it in the United States.
Widzicie maleńka koszka.
Dobra koszka.
A demonstrat că reformele nu sunt doar promisiuni, ci decizii curajoase care schimbă vieți.
Chisinau on its own is already one of the more unique cities that I've ever had the pleasure to visit, and that really combined with its vibrant architecture, art, history, and especially food would have made staying there throughout the entire week more than easy. It also presented an extraordinarily culturally diverse pocket of Moldovan society, which can be expected given the country's geographic position between Europe, Eurasia, and the Near East, but it was still quite remarkable to see in person regardless. It was also simply a really pretty city, and I honestly could have spent a lot of time just walking around Chisinau, which I guarantee you I did quite a bit of regardless. Yet, despite the many charming surprises of Chisinau, my goal in traveling there wasn't simply to only see Moldova, but also the lands just across the river, further east. I had already reached out to a professional guide who offered to tour me through Transnistria, so there was really nothing else I could do on the night of the 30th but wait for the sun to shine the next morning when I could begin my journey. However, it was fairly straightforward. My driver met me outside my hostel in Chisinau, and it took a little under 2 hours to make it all the way to the border with Transnistria. And I also got a quaint taste of some of the Moldovan countryside. Now, before the Soviet monuments, and before getting my hands on the plastic currency that this location is so known for, I would first have to make it through the border. And the border was growing very close, evidenced by the more and more frequent Soviet-era bus stops and murals that were positioned along the road. And my driver was also very kind and offered many times to stop and also explain the histories behind these murals. But when we made it almost all the way to the border, that was one of the first few instances where I would begin to feel a little nervous. And, of course, that almost certainly had to do with the fact that almost everything I'd ever known about Transnistria up until the previous month really had to do with everything I shared about in the previous video. So certainly not the most flattering image.
Не надо паспорт, здесь только вот...
Да. So there I was, about to approach the first of 3 major checkpoints. Alright, so I'm currently back in Moldova. I'm no longer in Pridnestyrovie, so also you know that my evaluation of the area is not in any way biased. So now, of course, I'm in a position to tell you how I genuinely felt about the area and how I felt inside Pridnestyrovie. There are a few things I think that are definitely worth keeping in mind. A few things which were a bit uneasy for me, particularly as an American. One was that there were Russian soldiers pretty much throughout the entire area. At the border, there were Russian soldiers mingling with the Moldovan soldiers. They had a Russian tank at the border as well. They had Russian troops fully armed patrolling. Of course, I don't have any video footage or photographs of the border itself because taking pictures of any military-related checkpoints is strictly prohibited. Now, when I did finally reach the last of the 3 border checkpoints, although I did have to hand over my passport, it was never stamped. Instead, I got this little slip of paper called a migration card. It basically tells me how long I can stay in the country legally and informs anyone who may need to know how I entered. But as I said, this piece of paper confirms that I entered the country legally and that I can be there for the day, so I made sure to keep it on me at all times. And now that we were in, it was time to exchange my Moldovan lei for some Pridnestyrovian rubles.
This process was pretty straightforward, and to be clear, Pridnestyrovie does have traditional paper and metal money. But I'm sure what most of you were curious about, and what I was most curious about as well, was the plastic currency. Yes, these are legal tender, yes, they are also plastic. Pretty cool. Needless to say, this is one of the reasons why Transnistria is often referred to as a quote-unquote plastic state. But now that I had the local currency, plus my migration card, it was time to do some sightseeing. That included some old statues commemorating Tsarist Russian officials who used to operate in the area, Soviet murals and monuments, and even a memorial in Bender to the Pridnestrovian soldiers who died fighting Moldova in the 1992 war. Although just wandering around this time capsule of a country was fascinating on its own, although there were several moments when I was told by my driver to put down my phone as we risked potentially being stopped if I had filmed something such as a checkpoint or military patrols or something along those lines. But now it was time to stop at the first major location of my trip, one of the old flea markets in Tiraspol.
This is wine. So now we get Pridnestrovie.
They really had a ton of old Soviet antiques here, and as a historian, I was absolutely blown away by it.
И сколько стоит это?
20 rubles.
Какой год?
Но это уже современно.
There were a ton of things on offer. The people were really friendly, and outside you could actually purchase a full cup of kvass for, if I remember correctly, the equivalent of less than half of a US dollar.
Вам сладкий или кисло-сладкий?
Сладкий, пожалуйста. Спасибо большое.
Это вы учите, да?
Спасибо.
Пожалуйста.
И сколько стоит?
7,50.
7.
My expression here doesn't do it justice, but it was good. But now it was time to see some more sights. And after paying tribute to Yuri Gagarin, I also saw the Parliament building and, I swear I'm not joking, a statue of Harry Potter for some reason. Next, I was to visit Catherine Park in the middle of Tiraspol, and I have to say, this was pretty cool. Here were the parade grounds, and you could also find statues such as this one commemorating the existence and the anniversary of the country. But the park was also, for lack of a better term, pretty chill and also quite scenic. And, just like in the United States, there were stands and stalls where one could buy food and refreshments.
Я хочу один фанта, пожалуйста. Да. Спасибо. It is quite warm out today. It's about 91 degrees right now. So actually quite hotter than really it's been at any point since I've been in Eastern Europe, since a few months ago. But so far I've spent the majority of my time in Tiraspol. And the people I've interacted with up until now have been very friendly, very welcoming, and very willing to talk about their experience living here, their interpretations of the history, their memory. One thing that is interesting to note is that travel here to this place is heavily discouraged. But to be honest, I really don't feel unsafe. It's definitely an interesting feeling knowing where I am. And I definitely think there are elements that make this particular location a little more just unique for tourism. But I don't feel in any way that it's something that can't be justified traveling to at a safety level.
So essentially, I felt that it was completely safe. I didn't feel that there was anything particularly dangerous. If you're just visiting the country as your average tourist, you're not going to encounter any trouble. At least I didn't. And of course, I'm approaching this from the perspective as a heterosexual white male. So I honestly can't speak for those who may have other identities that are more repressed in various places, or that may face greater scrutiny under some political circumstances.
But now it was time for lunch, which I enjoyed in an old restaurant full of old Soviet memorabilia. There was also this little cat. Fittingly, lunch consisted of meat pies, borscht, bread, and a complimentary shot of vodka.
Я мечтаю мир вместе страны.
From there, it was time to do more sightseeing, including visiting some other World War II materials, and even seeing this really cool river barge, just like the kinds they still use all over sub-Saharan Africa.
Again, you can definitely see it. There's a lot of nostalgia for the Soviet Union still.
That's something I feel like I've been in other countries where they have these monuments still, these statues, but they're usually few and far between, or they've been relocated somewhere very far away, usually both. Here, they're everywhere, they're still in the center. It's quite interesting, really. From statues of Lenin to Soviet murals, these monuments really were everywhere, honestly to a very surprising degree. As I said, I have been in other countries where these monuments still exist, but usually they're more sheltered, tend not to be in the public space. Here, they were very much everywhere. But the day was coming to a close, and my migration pass and my legal right to remain in the country would soon expire. So after visiting an old Soviet canteen to purchase some Pridnestrovian beer, it was time to visit one last site. Tejina Fortress, located in the town of Bender, was built by Moldovan Prince Stefan the Great around the 15th century. As you can see, this was a pretty impressive castle, and because it's located where it is in the world, most people really never get the chance to see it, so it was really cool to be able to walk around this old structure and take in a part of Pridnestrovie that I feel like most people overlook. Finally, the day was capped off just as it started, with a 2-hour drive, except this time, I was being taken back to Chisinau. The Pridnestrovian border guard even let me keep my migration pass as a souvenir. Ultimately, I think this is one of the most unique destinations I've ever visited, not just because of the history, but also given the contentious politics of it. And I will note again that, as I mentioned in my last video, this is a territory that is internationally recognized as part of Moldova. Moldova has consistently maintained that Transnistria is a part of its own territory, although the politics and administration in Transnistria are mostly separate from that of Moldova. And this isn't the only time that we've seen this happen in the world as well. There are other separatist enclaves that have popped up in other countries throughout Eastern Europe and Eurasia, although it is important to note that Transnistria, or Pridnestrovie, has garnered significant accusations regarding its being a Russian puppet state and undermining the civil liberties of its citizens, especially in recent years. Yet the people I encountered were very friendly, fun-loving, and ultimately were more than curious about my experience, my interpretation of it as an American. Safety-wise, I can only speak for myself. Again, I'm obviously a white male, so I think there's some element at which I really can't speak for women who may want to travel here, or for people who are queer who may want to travel here. But I will say, I absolutely love Eastern European history. I think Soviet history is very fascinating, and this was undoubtedly one of the wildest, most interesting journeys I've ever undertaken to anywhere in the world. Yeah, that's pretty much it. 2 parts to this one. Sorry it took me so long. Bye.